This highlights, and this shelter will highlight one important part of the announcement we made today with the homelessness framework piece of our new strategy on housing. We know there's a lot of people who are living in shelters who are going through a transition in life that's tough. And what we want to do is try and change this so this isn't just a place you go in an emergency, but it also becomes the starting of a journey to someday having your own place, having a roof over your head again, and beginning to be able to go back and get those things all of us want: a job, a roof over our head, a stable situation. We listened, and what we heard from folks at shelters like this one is there are two things they need. They need additional core funding so they can have staff on hand, one to manage the day-to-day needs, so they can also have folks who are working on following their clients out into the community, making sure that transition goes well. And also they need connections, that we do a good job of training, working together, sharing information, having systems, so that when people are here, staff are trained to work with the programs we offer so we can get them out into the community, into a place. Now we know that we've heard that residency is going down here. That's nice to hear in the middle of a tough global recession. I think some of the changes around economic unit I've heard of helping as well as the getting rid of that under $300 a month rate. We also want to make sure, though, that that isn't just a temporary journey. Often people land here because they may have undiagnosed illnesses. They may have had problems coping with some of the challenges in the real world. They may have had addictions. We've got to make sure that the staff can follow them out of the shelter and into that housing situation so it actually becomes a permanent life change.
Okay. How much money were we talking about?
There will be, between the shelters this year, they'll be sharing $250,000 in year one. That'll go to $500,000 in year two and $750,000 in year three. And those numbers come from consultations with the folks on the front lines. They identified that kind of staffing need. Here, for instance, it's somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000. That means, for instance, people don't have to work the night shift alone here. It provides a sort of stable staffing arrangement so that the night's taken care of here, and people like Ted can work on some of the transitional issues that really get people out of here, which is what we all want, obviously.
If the funding is going to be tripled over the next 3 years, what does that say about the level of funding that shelters like this have been receiving up until this point?
Well, they didn't. This is the first time there has been core funding for shelters, and there have certainly been one-off announcements. One tended to, I often joke, you could tell where the Minister of Social Development came from because you followed the dots of which shelters got funding. It tended to follow which ministers, and other than that, people didn't have any. They survived thanks to community fundraising, and that's important. And it wouldn't do any good to simply replace fundraising with government money, but to add on top of it. But when Brian at the shelter came to us and said, look, we've got to, here's what we could do. If we had a little more funding and some funding we could count on, we could hire staff, we could make those transitions, we could integrate with social development programming. You know, Rick and I worked hard on it, but we also said, let's not just make this a Fredericton announcement. Let's roll up our sleeves and find out how many other shelters are having this problem and have a real provincial strategy around it, which it's always a little longer, but that's, I think, the smart thing about